It begins with very special late-night programs aimed at your darkest fantasy, and evolves ever more rapidly until the line between fantasy and reality blurs and disappears. At first, you need the cassette, but then you are the cassette. And video images are reality, and reality is the final horror. A world of televised madness existing on both sides of the screen. A world in which star and victim are one, and you are both. Videodrome. Videodrome by Jack Martin. A novel based on a screenplay by David Cronenberg. Narrated by Amy Mullen. To those who feel the pain they see. I do it so it feels like hell. I do it so it feels real. I guess you could say I've a call. Sylvia Plath. The medium is the massage. Marshall McLuhan. To extreme sickness, extreme remedies. Montaigne. Harlan's voice. Torture, murder, mutilation. Videodrome. That was Masha. What you see on that show is for real. I'm gonna audition, said Nikki. I was made for that show. It has something that you don't have, Max. It has a philosophy, and that is what makes it dangerous. Max forced his eyes open. The faces stopped weaving in and out of the granular darkness in front of him. Their voices, too. All except Nikki's. The interior of his apartment ceased swimming and found its level. She continued to writhe spastically under the lash which extended from the muscular arm of an unseen assailant. The wall behind her, the TV screen, and the room in which he sat flowed with a color that was too deep to bear. It was 10:30 p.m., and still Max could not leave the red room. He pinched the bridge of his nose and groped with his other hand for the table lamp. He did not open his eyes again until it came on and diluted the intensity of the video image. He could have shut off the tape. He could have done that hours ago. But he was not yet finished with it. Or was it not yet finished with him? He had been sitting in one position too long. His kidneys ached, as if he had been pummeled into submission while asleep. Had he been asleep? How could he be sure? He held his eyes down and labored to regain control over his body, one muscle at a time. His belly itched. He must have been scratching it again. Damned nervous habit. He moved his hand to the collection of Videodrome cassettes on the table, tapped them idly. Next to them was the logbook. He opened the stenopad to the page marked Videodrome Transmission Pattern, but Harlan's scrawl remained impossible to decipher. The screaming from the television set subsided to a whimper. He got up abruptly and crossed the living room. He was dizzy, feverish. He switched off the tape and leaned on the set, sweating. Something's wrong with me. I'm sick, he thought. Maybe it's the flu. I hope to God it's the flu. What else could it be? As he stood there supporting himself against the cabinet, the top of the set softened. Without warning, it became sticky, gummy. It began to flow like gelatin. His hand sank in, 1 inch, 2 inches. Shocked, Max arched his body and pulled free. He raised his shaking hand. The palm was covered with blood. No, he thought. This isn't happening. It can't be. It didn't happen. See? It didn't. No, 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 no. He forced his eyes back to the set. There did appear to be a depression in the cabinet between his home video game joysticks. As he watched, the palm-sized indentation in the simulated wood closed over like a wound healing in time-lapse photography, and was gone. Compulsively, he wiped his hand on his shirt. No trace of blood, not a drop. Oh, you're tripping, Max. A flashback. A bad, bad one. He reached out blindly and rapped his knuckles on the top of the set. Hardwood. Well, wood-grained vinyl, at least. But solid. His belly still itched. He was getting some kind of rash, but there was no time to worry about that now. One cassette was his wake-up message. He grabbed the other one, opened it, and saw it move in his hand. His eyes widened in horror as the black plastic softened and quivered on his palm. The take-up reel melted and sagged, its edges flowing into a new shape. It was breathing. He dropped it. This isn't happening. It lay there on the carpet, inanimate object that it was. See? Oh, man, you must have tied one on last night. He probed it with the toe of his shoe. It was dead, all right. Okay. A piece of inert, injection-molded plastic loaded with 90 minutes of half-inch iron oxide videotape. That was all. He snickered and shook his head, and stooped to pick it up. The timer on his playback deck read 10:44 as he inserted the cassette. With no further hesitation, he turned the set on and started tape. An image blipped on. Standard color bars filled the screen from top to bottom. The bars jittered into alignment, then disappeared to be replaced by a medium-close shot of the professor at his desk. Max turned up the volume and sat. It was the desk at the cathode ray mission, no doubt about it. The stained glass, the tapestries. Oblivion shuffled papers, set them aside, folded his hands and looked up, addressing the camera. The battle for the mind of North America will be fought in the video arena, the Videodrome. The professor moistened his lips and twitched the sensitive antennae of his mustache. The television screen is the retina of the mind's eye, he continued lecturing, though not discernibly from notes or cue cards. He was speaking his mind, and he was one with his words. Therefore, the television screen is part of the physical structure of the brain. Therefore, whatever appears on the television screen emerges as raw experience for those who watch it. Therefore, television is reality, and reality is less than television. The way he put it, it sounded eminently logical. Or did it? Love comes in at the eye, The eye is the window of the soul, and Videodrome, he encircled his eyes with his fingers, is the ultimate spectacle. Max laughed at this last pun. The television oblivion raised his eyebrows as if taking notice. Max, I'm so glad you came to me. His voice sounded tired now, more confidential. I've been through it all myself, you see. What is this? Wondered Max. How does he do it? How did he know I'd be sitting here? But of course, the tape was intended for me, wasn't it? The pause, the shift in tone. It was a calculated guess. A perfectly accurate one, as it turns out. He's a pro. Media prophet, isn't that what they call him? It's a little spooky. Max heard his own voice ask, "What's going on?" "Well," said Oblivion, "you have a nice little addiction going. You have to be careful now." "Addiction?" said Max. "To what?" "Why, to the Videodrome signal, of course." Perfect timing again, the ultimate in synchronicity. They got you to start watching, they seduced you, and now you're hooked. But how does it work? Max wondered aloud. What does it do? For those who have a natural propensity for its imagery, it's a kind of bioelectronic heroin. Your brain has already become an electron gun. Your retinae have become video screens. Your reality is already half video hallucination. If you're not careful, it will become total hallucination. You'll have to learn to live in a very strange new world. The television soundtrack jingled metallically. The brain tumor is undoubtedly forming, said Oblivion, as a black hooded figure dressed in chainmail entered the frame. I had a brain tumor, and I had visions. The hooded figure pinned one of Oblivion's hands to the desk and clamped irons around the wrist. The professor kept talking. I believed that the visions caused the tumor and not the reverse. His other hand was wrenched down and his wrists locked together. I could feel the visions coalesce and become flesh, he said, trying to get his message across while there was still time. Uncontrollable flesh. The executioner slipped behind the chair and produced a garrote, looped its wire around Oblivion's throat. But when they removed the tumor, he choked, his eyes fixed on the camera, on Max. It was called Videodrome. The wire tightened, cutting into Oblivion's windpipe as it strangled him. I was Videodrome's first victim. Oblivion succumbed and was dragged off his chair. Papers and pens scattered. His feet kicked in a death dance. Max stood, swaying unsteadily. Who's behind it? He asked earnestly. Asked or thought it. He didn't know which. As if he could still be heard. As if he could ever have been heard. But he had to know. What do they want? The hooded figure stepped into frame again, coiling the wire. Then the figure leaped into camera, taking Oblivion's place, and ripped off the hood. I want you, Max. You. It was Nikki Brand. Come to me. She advanced on the camera so that her face filled the entire 19-inch screen. She licked her lips. Come to Nikki. She began to twist her new earring, tugging at it just enough to hurt, enjoying the small pain. Come on. Her enlarged face pressed out into the room in extreme close-up, all wet teeth and red Cupid's bow lips. He heard the crackling lilt of her breathing in his ears as the speaker cone vibrated and stretched out to him, a living orifice. Max approached the set as if in a dream. He fell to his knees before her image. Don't make me wait. As he grasped the breathing sides of the set, her larger-than-life lips distended to meet his forehead, the glass of the tube melting and ballooning outward to touch his skin. He pressed his face into her face as the electron guns shot their images directly into his brain. The set throbbed like an animal in heat. Max's eyes closed. He no longer needed them to see. Nikki Brand fired through his eyelids as though they were no longer there, a mere technicality. He licked the screen, the soft screen, distorting the plastic face of Nikki Brand as he strained toward the possibility of acceptance and release in her, caressing her, sinking deeper into the pores and pulsing veins, the wet membranes of her flesh. The mouth widened in response. Her teeth opened, revealing the glistening sea of her tongue, the video scan lines growing wider, separating horizontally and opening to receive him between their strobing, deeper and deeper into the swelling red lips, until he was totally engulfed by the darkness in her throat. Come to me now. Please. Oh, please. Convex held up a video cassette. Its casing was black and shiny, glinting like the soft, polished body of an arachnid, and it was breathing. Max wanted to knock it from his hand and crush it underfoot, but something held him back. He felt a force like a mighty wind blowing against him from the cassette itself. "What do you want from me?" he shouted over the energy field that was howling in his ears. "Why, I want you to open up, Max. Open up to me." Convex grabbed him under the ribcage with his short arms and unzipped Max's jacket, unbuttoned his shirt. The room, the walls, the charged air began to twitch and distort. Max watched as if it were happening to someone else. He saw himself flattened against the wall in the center of a video storm, his shirt tails flapping aside to expose the slit opening in his stomach again as the weakness in his gut gave way to admit Convex's pre-recorded missile. "I've got something I want to play for you." Convex rammed the cassette in, his hand entering up to the wrist. "Do yourself a favor, Max. Don't try to fight it. It's too late for that now. You're only making it difficult for yourself. Don't take it so hard." He removed his hand and Max collapsed forward, clutching his innards to hold himself together. He felt that he had been gutted. He tried to stand. He couldn't. "Give us what we want, then it won't hurt anymore. Come on over with the white folks. It's what you've secretly wanted all along, isn't it? Be a part of us. Wear the big picture now. Be a part of the future." Max attempted to crawl. He saw Harlan bending over him guiltily. for old time's sake. "We want what you've got, Max," said Convex, "and we're going to get what we want one way or another. It will be so much better this way. Believe me." Max doubled over, gasping for breath. Convex left him and strolled to the door, chest out, swinging his arms confidently. Max needed a hand. He reached out for something to hold on to. "Harlan," he wheezed. But, despite the ambivalence in his eyes now, Harlan straightened and loped out of the lab, following Convex. Max was alone. He reached down into the depths and found what didn't belong there. It was hard to get a grip on it. It was slippery, but he held on and would not let go. He pulled his hand out. He had something. It came out into the open, partially digested, colored by the soft parts of himself. It was not the cassette. It was the gun he had introjected and absorbed the other night. By now it was slimy and veined, jellied and pink and ready to be born anew. The Walther PPK automatic pistol. Clinging fast to the last thing he had to hold on to, he dragged his body out of the lab and propped up against the crumbling plaster beneath the stairs. He was seething inside, trying to heal. He raised his bloody fist and took a good look at what he had to work with. The handgun had attached itself, fused to his marrow. It retained its basic character under the layers of flesh and bone which had accrued around it. As he watched, the protective placenta-like membrane burst open, and extensions of living gunmetal grew out of the stock and wrapped tightly around his wrist, burrowing into the back of his hand and deep into his forearm, connecting with his arteries and sinews. Animated cables snaked out of the clip and penetrated his palms like living nails. The pistol fibrillated and expanded as it pumped his blood, his life, through its gears and chambers. What pain there was did not last as his hand metamorphosed and became potent, larger than life, and he knew that nothing would ever hurt again. The new living weapon that was his body wouldn't let it. The smoky air became warm, moist, and began to distort into grainy bands of light and darkness. A great weight seemed to hold him to his knees, firm but not unkind. Its pressure was almost loving, its gentle insistence almost cruel. He had no choice. But that was all right. There were so many little dyings that it didn't matter which of them was death. After all, how else could it end? It would be a new experience, the ultimate one. Wouldn't it? He thought, and the last of the old shall become the first of the new. This is it. Do it. The trick was not to stop until it was done. Do it. Do it now. He looked at his surroundings as though awakening from a dream. Like himself, it was a place he had never known. Until now. His hand closed as he prepared for the first thrust. He could no longer see Nikki's face. He needed a witness. He closed his eyes. He wanted her to be looking at him. "Long live the new flesh," he said. There was a roar of thunder.